The blood hit the floor before anyone understood what was happening. Screaming filled the corridors of Pine Valley Medical Center, while staff dove behind overturned gurneys and patients clutched each other in the dark. Outside, an Army Black Hawk was already cutting through the Oregon sky, rotors hammering, doors open, soldiers locked and ready. And somewhere in that building, crawling through smoke and chaos, was the woman the hospital had just thrown out. Not a soldier anymore. Just a nurse. The nurse they called too intense. The nurse they humiliated in front of the entire staff. The nurse who was the only reason any of them survived. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, follow my channel so you never miss what happens next. Hit like if you believe Emily deserved better, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all started. The shift started at 6 in the morning, the way most bad days do. Quietly, with bad coffee and a fluorescent light buzzing somewhere down the hallway that nobody had bothered to fix in 3 weeks. Emily Carter pulled her scrub top over her head, checked her watch, and tied her hair back in the kind of knot that took about 4 seconds and didn't move for 12 hours. She had a system for everything. That was the problem, according to some people. She was too systematic, too rigid, too military. She didn't argue with that last one. She had been out of the Army for 2 years, 8 months, and somewhere around 16 days, not that she was counting. She'd come to Redstone, Oregon the same way a lot of veterans ended up in small cities, following something that felt like quiet. Not quite finding it, but staying anyway because moving again felt worse. Pine Valley Medical Center had hired her on the spot. Her trauma certification, her clinical hours, her ability to function under pressure without falling apart, all of it looked excellent on paper. What looked less excellent, apparently, was everything else. She clocked in, nodded to Daria Ose at the front desk, a nursing tech who always looked slightly too tired and slightly too sharp for the role she'd been given, and moved toward the ER bay. "Morning," Daria said without looking up. "Kovac is already in a mood." "He's always in a mood. Today it's a bigger mood. Something about the quarterly review." Emily didn't ask follow-up questions. She pushed through the double doors into the trauma bay and started her assessment the way she always did, moving from station to station, checking supply levels, noting what had been used overnight, flagging 2 IV bags that were past rotation date. She pulled them, tagged them, left a note in the supply log. By the time she'd finished the sweep, Dr. Marcus Kovac was standing in the doorway watching her with an expression she'd learned to read inside of her first 2 weeks. It wasn't quite irritation. It was something more specific. The look of a man who felt that someone in the room was doing something that made him look like he wasn't doing enough. "The overnight team already did supply check," he said. "I know, a couple of things got missed. It happens. The IV bags were past date." He crossed his arms. "Emily, this is a hospital, not a FOB. You don't need to run a pre-mission sweep every morning." She looked at him for a moment. "I'm just doing my job." "Your job," he said, "is what I tell you it is." She didn't respond to that. She knew better than to respond to that. She went to her first patient instead, an elderly man in Bay 3 who'd come in overnight with chest pressure and was supposed to have been discharged 2 hours ago, except the discharge paperwork had been sitting incomplete on a desk somewhere while a technician was on break. She got him his paperwork. She got him a glass of water. She got him out the door by 7:15, and she did it without making a scene about any of it. That was, as far as she could tell, not something people noticed. The things that went smoothly never got noticed. It was the friction that got attention. The friction started around 10. A patient had come in from a vehicle accident on Highway 18, a 22-year-old named Trace Bowen with a suspected internal bleed and a blood pressure that was sliding in the wrong direction. Emily was already at his side when the attending physician, Dr. Sonia Patel, arrived to take over, and the two of them worked together without needing to say much. Emily had his line in, had called for the imaging order, had already read his vitals trajectory, and flagged the drop. Patel glanced at the chart. "You prepped the OR call?" "Waiting on your authorization." "Do it." They moved fast and clean, and the kid got to surgery in under 12 minutes from intake. Emily didn't think much of it. You found the bleed, you moved him, you moved on. What she didn't expect was Ronald Fitch walking into the ER bay 30 minutes later, looking like something had personally offended him. Ronald Fitch was the chief of operations at Pine Valley, not a doctor, not a nurse, an administrator, the kind who'd risen through healthcare management the way certain people did, by being good at spreadsheets and worse at everything a spreadsheet couldn't measure. He was 53, wore a sport coat every day regardless of season, and had a habit of saying going forward before anything he said that was actually about the past. "Emily," he said, not quite loudly, but not quietly either. "Can I have a word?" She was restocking a crash cart. "I'm in the middle of something. Now, please." She finished what she was doing, because the crash cart mattered more than his schedule, and followed him to the small glass-walled office off the nurse's station. Through the glass, she could see Daria pretending not to watch. Fitch closed the door and did not offer her a seat. "I've received some feedback," he said, "about your conduct this morning." She waited. "You bypassed Dr. Kovac on the OR protocol for the trauma case. I had authorization from the attending. Dr. Patel ordered the call. Dr. Kovac is your direct supervisor in the ER structure. Going around him? I didn't go around him. He wasn't at the patient's bedside. Patel was. The patient needed an OR call in the next 4 minutes, or we were going to lose the window." "That's not the point." "What is the point?" Fitch looked at her the way people look at someone who is asking a question they find irritating because they don't have a good answer for it. "The point," he said, "is that your conduct in this department has been consistently, what? Disruptive." She almost laughed. Disruptive. "You override team decisions. You run your own assessments before the attending has a chance to—" "I run my assessments in parallel. That's called efficiency. That's called not trusting your colleagues." She looked at him. She made herself count to 3 before she spoke again, which was a habit she'd developed in the Army because the Army had taught her that what you said in the first second of anger was usually the thing you regretted. "Mr. Fitch," she said, "the patient this morning presented with a BP of 84/50 and a downward trend. Every second we spent waiting was a second closer to crash. I did my job. If that's disruptive, I genuinely don't know what you want from me." He straightened his jacket. "Going forward, I need you to work within the established chain of communication. Dr. Kovac has final authority in the ER, and that authority needs to be respected." She nodded once, not in agreement, just in acknowledgement that he had spoken. She went back to work. It was the security meeting that broke it open. Pine Valley had been having problems. Not dramatic ones, not yet, but the kind that accumulated quietly and became dramatic fast if nobody paid attention. A known gang affiliation had been flagged at a drug overdose intake 3 weeks prior, and 2 visitors had been turned away from the ICU for behavior that security had logged as threatening without escalation. The ER entrance faced a parking structure with 0 camera coverage on the east side. The panic button system in Trauma Bay 2 had been malfunctioning for 11 days, and the work order kept getting deprioritized. Emily had documented all of it. She'd sent a 3-page memo to Fitch's office 2 weeks ago. She'd sent a follow-up. She'd raised it in the weekly nursing meeting and watched it get tabled because there were budget items that needed to go first. The security planning meeting was scheduled for 11 on a Tuesday. She attended because she'd requested a spot on the agenda. She got 3 minutes. She stood at the head of the conference table. Fitch on one end, the security manager Glenn DeBrow on the other, 2 other administrators, and a risk consultant filling the seats between. And she walked through it in order. Camera coverage gaps. Panic button failure. Visitor flagging logs. The specific combination of entry point vulnerabilities that created a scenario where a coordinated incursion through the main ER entrance would reach the trauma bay before any response team could intercept. She said that last part plainly, without decoration. "A coordinated incursion," DeBrow repeated. He said it the way you'd repeat a word from a language you didn't speak. "You mean like a mass shooting event? Or a targeted assault? The specifics depend on who the target is and what their objective is. The vulnerability is the same regardless." Fitch clicked his pen twice. "Emily, I appreciate the thoroughness. The east side of the parking structure has no coverage. The panic button in Trauma 2 has been broken for 11 days. Those aren't theoretical problems. We have a repair order in for the button. It's been deprioritized 3 times. That's a facilities management issue, not a security. If someone comes through that entrance with a weapon and we can't call it in from trauma 2, it becomes everybody's issue. The risk consultant, a man in his 40s whose name she'd already forgotten, leaned forward. These scenarios, they're fairly unlikely in a community hospital setting. Statistically speaking, unlikely isn't the same as impossible. Fitch held up a hand. We hear you. We do. These concerns are going to be logged, and we'll revisit the security review schedule in Q4. Q4 was 3 months away. She looked around the table. Glenn DeBrow was writing something. The risk consultant had straightened his papers. The 2 administrators were checking their phones. She picked up her notes and walked out. She didn't expect the next part to happen as fast as it did. She was at the nurse's station at 2:15 in the afternoon when Fitch appeared again, this time with 2 people she didn't recognize, a woman from Human Resources named either Janet or Janelle. She'd never been formally introduced, and a man in a gray suit who worked in hospital administration and who she'd only ever seen in the quarterly all-staff emails. Emily, Fitch said, we need to speak privately. The nurse's station was not private. There were 4 people at the desk, including Daria, and 2 nursing assistants moving through the space, and none of them even pretended to stop listening. She followed Fitch to the same glass-walled office. He didn't close the door all the way this time. We've decided, he said, to reassign you from the trauma unit, effective immediately. She looked at him. We're moving you to outpatient support rotation for the time being while we conduct a review of some performance and conduct concerns that have been raised. By who? Multiple sources within the department have. By who specifically? The HR woman stepped in. Emily, the process here is that we collect feedback across. I've been in this ER for 11 months without a single patient complaint, without a single clinical error. I've flagged safety issues that this hospital has chosen to ignore, and now I'm being reassigned. It's temporary, Fitch said. Is it? Silence. She looked at him. She looked at the HR woman. She looked at the man in the gray suit who still hadn't said anything and showed no signs of starting. Then she unclipped her badge from her scrub top. She held it for a moment. She set it on the desk. I'm not moving to outpatient rotation, she said. If you're pulling me from the trauma unit, I'm done. Fitch blinked. Emily, I don't think you'll wish you listened. She said it quietly. Not as a threat, more like stating a weather forecast. She walked out of the office and through the ER bay and past the nurse's station where Daria was watching her with an expression that was equal parts respect and alarm, and she pushed through the double doors and out into the afternoon, and she got approximately 40 feet into the parking lot before she heard the first gunshot. 1 shot, then 3, then a sustained series that didn't stop. She didn't think. She turned. The sound was coming from inside, from the ER entrance, the same entrance she'd flagged, with the parking structure to its east that had no camera coverage, the same entrance she'd drawn a red circle around on a building diagram and slid under Fitch's office door 16 days ago. She saw the glass shatter in the automatic door from here. She saw people in the lobby drop. She saw a figure moving through the entrance carrying something that was absolutely not a visitor's bag. Her body made the decision before her brain finished the calculation. She was moving back toward the building at a run, cutting left toward the ambulance bay because the main entrance was now a kill zone, and she knew that the ambulance bay connected to the trauma corridor through a supply hall that almost nobody knew existed because almost nobody had ever needed to map the building with that kind of attention. She did. She'd done it the second week. She'd walked the whole building the way she'd learned to walk every new position, mapping exits, noting choke points, identifying the places where a bad situation could move fast. She hit the ambulance bay at full speed, badge-free and without authorization, and a paramedic named Ruiz who was unloading a gurney looked at her with startled eyes. Active shooter, she said. How many rigs are staged? 2. Get them out of this bay, now, and call it in if nobody's called it in yet. The dispatch is already, move the rigs. He moved the rigs. She went inside. The supply corridor was dim and smelled like industrial cleaner, and everything was wrong in the way she recognized from a different kind of life. Sound was her first reference point. She tracked where the shooting was coming from, tracked where it wasn't, and moved accordingly. She came out of the corridor into the trauma bay from the back, the side that opened toward the clean utility room, and what she found was 37 feet of controlled chaos. 2 nurses were crouched behind a supply cart. A nursing assistant was flat on the floor with her hands over her head. Dr. Kovac was standing against the far wall, with a look on his face like his brain had simply refused to process what was happening and had temporarily shut down all output while it tried to restart. There was a patient, the elderly man from Bay 3, back again it seemed, his discharge not having stuck, slumped in a wheelchair near the hall entrance. He was clutching his chest. Emily moved to the nurses first. "You." She kept her voice even, controlled. "What's your name?" "Tasha." "Tasha, I need you to move that patient to the back corridor. Do you know the supply hall behind utility?" Yes." "Take him there. Stay low. Don't go into the main lobby." She looked at the nursing assistant on the floor. "Get up. Go with her. Help her with the chair." The woman looked at her. "Now, move." They moved. She looked at Kovac. "How many patients are mobile?" He stared at her. "Kovac." Her voice dropped half a register. "How many patients can move?" He blinked. Something clicked back on. "Trauma 1. Patient sedated. Bay 2 discharged. 3. That was the Hendricks transfer. He's gone. We had 2 walk-ins in the waiting room. The waiting room is compromised. Who's in Trauma 1? Post-op from this morning. The MVA. Trace Bowen, 22 years old, abdomen surgery 2 hours ago. "Okay," she said. "Here's what's happening. I need a transport kit, and I need it in the next 90 seconds. Can you do that?" "I'm not..." "Emily, the protocol is to shelter in place. The shelter-in-place protocol assumes the threat is static. It's not. There are at least 2 individuals moving through the building. Sheltering in place in a room with 1 exit puts everyone in this room at the end of a funnel." She looked at him. "Transport kit. Please." He went and got the transport kit. She went to Trauma 1. Trace Bowen was unconscious, vitals stable, a drain in place, a bag of fluids hanging from the IV pole. Moving him was a risk. Not moving him, given that the sound of gunfire was now clearly audible from the direction of the main corridor, was a bigger one. She disconnected what could be disconnected, secured what couldn't, and had the gurney moving before Kovac returned with the kit. "Take the foot," she said. He did. They moved through the supply corridor in silence, and she listened the whole way, tracking sound, tracking movement, recalibrating direction every 30 seconds. When they reached the staging area at the far end of the corridor where the ambulance bay connected to the building's secondary entrance, she counted heads. Tasha. The nursing assistant whose name she still didn't know. The elderly man in the wheelchair. 2 other patients who'd apparently followed the movement the way people follow movement in a crisis. Not because anyone told them to, but because someone was moving with purpose, and purpose felt like survival. Trace Bowen on the gurney. Kovac still carrying the kit. She did a head count. 7. "Stay here," she said. "Don't open the bay door until I tell you." "Where are you going?" Kovac asked. She was already moving. She went back in twice. The first time for a patient she'd heard calling out from the orthopedic pre-op room, a 40-year-old woman named Mrs. Galvao, who'd been prepped for a knee procedure and had been left alone when her surgical team evacuated. She was not mobile on her own. Emily got her mobile. The second time because she'd heard a sound from the imaging alcove. A child, it turned out. A boy, maybe 8, who'd been sitting with his mother in the waiting room before the shooting started and had gotten separated from her in the first wave of panic. He was behind the MRI machine, sitting on the floor, arms around his knees. She picked him up. She carried him through the corridor. She set him down next to Mrs. Galvao, and she said, "You're okay. Stay with her." And he looked at her with the kind of stunned calm that children sometimes have in crisis, when shock smooths everything to a single clear note of compliance. Back in the staging area, she counted again. 9. The shooting outside had shifted. It was no longer continuous. There were gaps, which meant either something was changing tactically or one of the shooters had run into a problem. She'd learned in a different life that gaps were not the same as endings, and she didn't celebrate the quiet. She used it. She was running through the supply inventory in the transport kit, assessing what she had, what she didn't, what she could improvise, when the sound hit from outside. Not gunfire. Something else. A rotary thump building from the northwest, getting loud fast. She knew that sound. She'd heard it 200 times in conditions a lot more hostile than this. She'd heard it in the dark over mountains she couldn't name, in dust that turned the air to sand, in the kind of heat that bent the air into shapes. A Black Hawk. She stepped to the edge of the ambulance bay door and looked up. And there it was, cutting low over the building, moving toward the roof, the side door already open, and in the door she could see a man in full tactical kit who moved with the kind of economy that came from doing the thing so many times that nothing about it was performance anymore. She stepped back inside. She looked at Kovacs. "Military response team," she said. "Roof." He stared at her. "How do you—" "The sound. It's a Black Hawk." She looked at the group against the wall. "Don't move. Don't open the bay door. Whatever you hear, don't move until someone with a badge and a rifle tells you it's clear. Not a hospital badge, a military one." "Emily," Kovacs started, but she was already moving back toward the corridor because there was still one thing she hadn't checked. The trauma bay. The room she'd cleared first, the room she'd left in a hurry, and in the hurry she'd seen something she hadn't fully registered until this moment. A door on the far wall, partially open, and behind it a shape on the floor that might have been a piece of equipment that had fallen, or might not have been. She moved through the dim corridor at a controlled pace, listening at each junction, and she came back into the trauma bay from the utility entrance, and the first thing she saw confirmed it was not a piece of equipment. Glenn Dubrow, the security manager, was on the floor in the far corner of the room. He was breathing. His right hand was clamped to his left shoulder, and his face had gone the white-gray color of someone whose body was doing everything it could to redirect resources to the center. He'd been shot. She was at his side in 4 steps. "Look at me," she said. He looked at her. His eyes were unfocused but present. "Through and through?" she asked, already moving his hand to check the wound. I think so." Exit wound was there. Good. She grabbed 2 pressure pads from the transport kit she'd had the sense to bring back with her, applied them front and back, pressed his hand firmly against the front one. "Hold that. Hard." "I tried to call it in," he said. His voice was thin. "The panic button in trauma, too. I know. It didn't work. I know. Hold the pressure. They came through the east lot. Just like you." He stopped, swallowed. "Just like you said." She taped the pad, elevated his arm, did a rapid assessment. Color, capillary refill, breathing. He was stable for now. Losing blood, but stable. "You're going to be okay," she said. "You're going to feel like garbage for about 3 weeks, and then you're going to be okay." She heard boots above her, heavy, coordinated, moving fast through the upper corridor in a pattern she recognized. They were clearing the building. She got back on her feet, positioned herself in the center of the trauma bay, and waited. 30 seconds. The door at the far end of the bay came open, and 2 figures in full tactical gear swept in, rifles up, moving in the practiced rhythm of a team that had done this particular dance so many times it no longer needed choreography. They saw her. Weapons adjusted, but did not lower. "Hands," one of them said. She put her hands up. "I'm a nurse," she said. "I've got 1 wounded, GSW to the left shoulder, stabilized, in the corner. I've also got 9 patients and 2 staff members staged in the ambulance bay. Everyone's accounted for." The second operator spoke into a comm unit at his shoulder. The door behind them opened again. The man who walked in was not in full kit. He had a vest, a sidearm, and the kind of bearing that didn't need equipment to announce itself. He was maybe 45, with a face that had been outdoors for most of those years, and a haircut that didn't match anything civilians maintained voluntarily. He stopped in the center of the room and looked at her. Not at the room. At her. 9 patients staged and accounted for, he said. Not a question. Yes. Wounded secured. He's losing blood at a manageable rate. He needs a surgeon in the next hour. The man studied her for a moment. Then he looked at the two operators flanking him, and something passed between them. Not a word, not quite a gesture, just that compression of shared understanding that happened in people who'd spent enough time in bad situations together. He looked back at her. "What's your name?" "Emily Carter." Something shifted in his expression. It was subtle, but she'd learned a long time ago to read subtle. "You're the nurse they removed from duty this afternoon," he said. "About 45 minutes ago, yes." 45 minutes ago, he repeated. He looked at the wounded security manager in the corner. He looked at the clearly organized staging she'd established, the pressure dressings, the transport kit. Then he looked at her again. "Major Daniel Rourke," he said, 82nd Airborne, attached to Federal Emergency Response. He did not extend his hand for a handshake. He gave her a nod, the kind that meant something specific. "Miss Carter," he said, "I'm going to need your help." From somewhere above them in the building came a sharp exchange of sound, movement, two controlled bursts, then silence again. The team above was pushing the last of the threat toward a containment point. Rourke looked up briefly, then back at her. "We're not done yet," he said. "I know," she answered. And somewhere on the other side of the hospital, a door slammed and someone started shouting in a voice she recognized as Ronald Fitch's, demanding to know who had authorized military access to the building, demanding to speak to someone in charge. Rourke heard it too, his jaw set in a particular way. "Who is that?" he asked. "The man who told me my concerns were being logged for Q4 review," she said. Rourke looked at her for one more second. Then he turned and moved toward the sound of Fitch's voice. Fitch's voice carried through the corridor the way voices do when someone is used to being the loudest person in a room and has not yet understood that the room has changed. "I need someone to tell me right now who authorized this military presence in my facility. This is a private medical institution, and there are protocols." Rourke walked toward the sound at an unhurried pace, which Emily recognized as a specific kind of discipline. The men who moved fast in emergencies and slow in confrontations were the ones who'd learned the difference between urgency and noise. She followed at a distance, not because anyone had asked her to, because she wanted to see it. Fitch was in the main corridor junction, 30 feet from the ER entrance. Standing between two hospital administrators she recognized from the security meeting and a facilities manager who looked like he genuinely wished he were somewhere else. Fitch's sport coat was rumpled, and his face was the color of someone who'd had a significant cardiovascular event or was working toward one. His phone was in his hand. He'd been trying to call someone. The call hadn't connected or the person hadn't answered. When he saw Rourke, he straightened. "Are you in charge of this operation?" "Yes," Rourke said. "Then I need you to explain to me under what federal authority—" "Mr." Rourke glanced at the ID badge on Fitch's lapel. "Fitch, I need you to step back from this corridor and move to the east stairwell staging area. My team will escort you. I'm the chief of operations for this hospital. I have a responsibility. Your building is not fully secure. I have one team clearing the third floor and another moving through radiology. Until I get the all clear, everyone who is not active personnel moves to staging. That includes you." Fitch looked past Rourke and saw Emily standing behind him. His expression did something complicated. Surprise, then something harder to name. The look of a man recalibrating, trying to determine what the presence of a person he'd dismissed 45 minutes ago behind a federal military officer meant for his current position. "She doesn't have authorization to be in this building," he said. "She was removed from duty this afternoon. She staged 9 patients and 1 GSW casualty while your security infrastructure failed," Rourke said. "I'll take her authorization over yours right now." He looked at the two operators who'd followed him into the corridor. "Get them to staging." Fitch opened his mouth, closed it. One of the operators put a hand on his shoulder, not rough, but definitive, and guided him toward the stairwell. He went. He kept his spine straight and his chin level, the way men do when they're losing ground and have decided that bearing is the only thing left to preserve. Emily watched him go. She didn't feel satisfaction. Not exactly. Something quieter and less clean than that. Rourke turned back to her, and the recalibration was immediate. He was already moving past it, past Fitch, past all of it. Wounded count, he said. Dubrow and trauma bay. Shoulder. Pressure stabilized. I've got the others in the ambulance bay staging, 2 with mobility limitations. I need a surgical consult on the MVA patient from this morning. He's post-op, and I moved him through a corridor in a gurney, so I want someone checking the drain. Rourke spoke into his comm. Brief, clipped, precise. He listened. Spoke again. Surgical team is inbound from Oregon Health. ETA 11 minutes. We've got 2 EMTs on standby at the staging area. Good. How'd you know the supply corridor, he asked. Not accusatory, genuinely curious. I walked the building my second week. Mapped it. He looked at her. Force of habit? Something like that. He didn't push it. She appreciated that. They moved back toward the trauma bay, and she updated her assessment of Dubrow. Pressure holding, color marginally better, still conscious and communicative, which was what mattered. One of Rourke's operators had positioned himself at the bay entrance and was managing traffic with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd spent a long time in field positions where managing traffic meant something considerably more dangerous. Carter, Rourke said. She looked up from Dubrow. 3rd floor. We've got a report of 2 individuals who may have sheltered in the oncology ward. Staff members, possibly a patient. My team is moving on it, but the oncology layout. He paused. Our floor plan is 6 months old. There was a renovation. She knew this. She'd been up there twice in the last month, once for a transport and once because a float assignment had sent her to cover a shift when the floor was short-staffed. She knew what the renovation had changed. There's a new access corridor behind the nursing station, she said. It connects to the old supply room. If they went in there, they're not coming out the way my team expects. Can you walk my team through it? She stood up. I can do better than that. The stairwell smelled like construction dust and something acrid she chose not to think about too carefully. She moved with 2 of Rourke's operators, a woman named Sergeant Adeze Nwosu, compact and precise, and a man who'd introduced himself only as Walsh, up 3 flights with her hands free and her head processing the layout she'd memorized without meaning to memorize it. New corridors behind the nursing station, runs east, she said, keeping her voice low. Old supply room at the end. 1 door in, 1 window that doesn't open because it was painted shut in the renovation. If your people come at them from the main hall, they'll push them deeper. We need to come around, Nwosu said. There's a secondary access through the physical therapy suite. If PT is unlocked, we'll make it unlocked, Walsh said. The 3rd floor was dim. The overhead fluorescents had been cut to emergency power, and the alternating pattern of lit and unlit panels made the space feel more disorienting than dark would have. Emily moved through it, reading the space rather than the light, counting doors, feeling the air pressure change as they rounded the nursing station corner. The PT suite door was locked. Walsh handled it in about 8 seconds. She didn't watch how. They moved through the PT suite, weights on the floor, a therapy table with its paper covering still neatly rolled out, the oddly peaceful paraphernalia of ordinary recovery, and out through the far door into the supply annex. The oncology supply room was at the end of a short hall that smelled like antiseptic and old paint. Nwosu held them at the corner, listened, then made a hand signal Emily recognized without thinking about why she recognized it. Nwosu pushed the door. Inside, 3 people. A woman in scrubs, oncology nurse, her badge read L. Ferreira, sitting on the floor with her back against a supply shelf, 1 arm around a patient Emily placed at about 70, thin in the way oncology patients get thin. And next to them, crouched by the far wall, a dietary aide named Marcus, who Emily had seen in the cafeteria about 100 times, and who was currently holding a mop handle across his knees like he'd decided that if something came through that door, he was going to use it. He relaxed when he saw the rifles were pointed at the floor. Hospital staff? Nwosu said. Ferreira, L. RN, 3rd floor. The nurse's voice was controlled but not quite steady. This is Mr. Oduya. He's my patient. Marcus is dietary. We heard the shots and the new corridor was the fastest shelter point. You did exactly right, Nwosu said. Emily was already at the patient. Mr. Oduya was pale and his breathing was shallow but not distressed. The pallor and the shallow breathing were probably baseline for a man in his condition. She took his wrist, counted, pulse thin but regular. "Mr. Oduya," she said. "I'm Emily. I'm a nurse. How are you feeling?" He looked at her with eyes that were tired but clear. "I've had worse Tuesdays," he said. She almost smiled. Narbant. They got the three of them down the stairwell and into staging, and Emily handed them off to the EMTs who'd arrived while she was on the third floor, and then she stood for a moment at the edge of the ambulance bay and took stock. 12 people staged, 2 with wounds requiring surgical attention, everyone else stable. The sound from inside the building had gone quiet in the last several minutes. No more movement, no more sporadic shots. The pattern of silence had shifted from tense to controlled. Rourke appeared at the bay entrance. "Building's clear," he said. "Both subjects are in federal custody." She let out a breath she hadn't been fully aware of holding. "Casualties?" she asked. "2 of mine are injured, non-critical, civilian side." He looked at his comm screen. 3 injuries in the initial breach, all survivable. 1 cardiac event in the lobby, paramedics are on that. Your security manager will need surgery, but he'll be fine. She nodded. "You want to tell me how you knew where to find access to that oncology corridor?" he said. "I walked the building." "Most people walk buildings and see rooms," Rourke said. "You walked it and saw a floor plan." She didn't answer that directly. "Old habit." He studied her for a moment. The 2 operators who'd come down with her from oncology were giving their report to another member of the team, and the EMTs were working on the staging group, and the ambulance bay was filling up with the controlled chaos of an incident winding down, which looked different from crisis, but was still not quiet. "You were Army," Rourke said. It wasn't a question. "Combat medic," she said. 3 deployments. "Where?" "Kandahar the first 2. Third was a special operations support attachment, Helmand." Something moved in his expression. "Helmand? What year?" 2018 to 2019. He looked at her in a way that was both specific and unreadable. "I was there." She met his eyes. "I know," she said. "I know who you are." The silence between them had texture, the kind that comes from a shared context that neither person had spoken about in a long time. "You knew when I walked in," he said. "I didn't know it was you specifically. I knew the unit patch. I recognized the movement pattern. And you didn't say anything. You were busy." He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but was in the same neighborhood. "Carter," he said. "Medic. Helmand." Something was resolving for him. She could see it. "Team 4-7 support rotation." "Yes." He stood there for a moment. "You pulled 3 men out of a collapsed structure in a firefight that lasted 6 hours, he said. "And when they got the final team out, you had a tourniquet on your own leg that you'd applied without stopping what you were doing." She hadn't thought about that specific day in a while. It lived in her the way a lot of things lived in her. Not gone, not present, just stored. "There were 6 of us in that rotation," she said. "I had the most hands free. You were the one who went back in twice." "That part seems to be a habit," she said. The FBI arrived 22 minutes after the all-clear. They came in 2 vehicles and a mobile command unit, and the lead agent, a woman named Special Agent Diane Harwick, 40 and angular, with reading glasses on a chain she hadn't put on yet, did a sweep of the incident with Rourke's team that took about 15 minutes. Then she found Emily. They stood near the staging area while the EMTs began preparing patient transfers, and the medical staff who'd been in various states of shelter in place started trickling back into accessible areas of the building, some of them looking dazed, some of them looking for people to tell them what to do. Harwick had a legal pad and a pen. She used both. "You were removed from duty before the incident began," she said, "about 45 minutes before. And you re-entered the building after the shooting started." "Yes." "Without authorization." "There wasn't anybody with authorization left in a position to give it. The ones who could authorize were hiding or running." Harwick wrote something. "What was the stated reason for your removal from duty?" Emily gave her the summary version: conduct concerns, performance review. The chain of communication issue with Kovacs. She kept it factual and compressed, and Harwick wrote all of it without interrupting. You'd filed security concerns prior to this incident. 3 weeks ago, and a follow-up memo 12 days ago. I also raised it directly in the security planning meeting yesterday. Harwick looked up. We'll need those documents. I sent them by email. I have the sent receipts. You kept them. I keep everything, Emily said. Another old habit. Harwick clicked her pen once. We're going to need a full statement. That'll take some time. I'm not going anywhere. Us. At that moment, across the staging area, she saw Fitch. He was talking to one of Harwick's agents, or more accurately, he was talking at the agent, who was holding a recording device and wearing an expression of focused patience. Next to Fitch, the HR woman stood with her arms crossed over her chest. Neither of them looked comfortable. Emily watched for a moment. Then she looked away. Kovacs appeared near the bay entrance, moving carefully around the EMTs. He looked older than he had that morning. Whatever had gotten stripped away in the last hour. The authority, the sport coat posture, the casual surplus of confidence he wore around the ER. It hadn't come back yet. He spotted her, hesitated, then crossed toward her. He stopped a few feet away. The patients you staged, he said. I need to know everyone's current status. EMTs have the manifest. Dubrow and the MVA patient from this morning are priority surgical. The others are stable. He nodded. He started to turn away, then stopped. The panic button, he said. In trauma 2. You flagged it. Weeks ago. He absorbed that. His jaw moved in a way that was not a response to anything she'd said, but to something internal. I didn't know about the security memo, shit, he said. It went to Fitch. I know that. I'm saying I didn't know about it. He met her eyes. I'm not saying it to make anything better. He stopped again. The usual fluency was gone. You got them out, he said finally. All of them. The corridor helped. Emily. He said her name the way people say names when they're using it to do work that words aren't quite doing. You didn't have to come back in. Yes, I did, she said. She meant it simply, the way she meant most things, and he seemed to understand that arguing with it would get nowhere. He nodded once and walked back toward his team. The surgical units arrived from Oregon Health just past 4 in the afternoon. 2 vans of OR staff and a portable surgical consult team that had been activated under the regional emergency protocol. Emily walked them to Dubrow and to Trace Bowen and stayed long enough to give handoff reports on both before Harwick's team redirected her to the mobile command unit for her formal statement. She sat across from a younger agent who typed while she talked, and she talked for close to an hour, giving a timeline of the afternoon. The morning shift, the security meeting, Fitch's office, the parking lot, everything up through the 3rd floor corridor. The agent asked good questions. She answered them without decoration. When she came out of the command unit, it was past 5 and the sky over Redstone had gone the bruised orange-pink of a Pacific Northwest evening in early fall. The parking lot was full of law enforcement vehicles and news vans, and the first cluster of bystanders that gather at the perimeter of any incident large enough to make the regional scanner. Rourke was standing outside the mobile unit when she came out. He had a paper cup of coffee that probably wasn't good, and he didn't look like he'd been resting. Done with your statement? He said. For now. He handed her the other paper cup that she hadn't seen in his other hand. She took it. It wasn't good. She drank it anyway. You know this isn't over, he said. The incident? The incident is over. The rest of it. He looked at the building. Those memos you sent. The security gaps you flagged. The fact that you were removed from your position 45 minutes before a preventable breach. He looked back at her. Federal investigators are going to have a long, close look at how this hospital runs. Good, she said. You're not worried about that? Why would I be worried about an investigation into things I documented and reported? He studied her. Some people would be nervous, even clean ones. Some people didn't spend 11 months trying to get those problems fixed, she said. He drank his coffee. The evening light came sideways across the parking lot, and somewhere beyond the perimeter, a news van had its satellite up, and a reporter was doing a stand-up with the hospital behind her. "What happens to you now?" Rourke asked. "I'm technically unemployed." "I know that. I mean, what do you want to happen?" She thought about it. It was an honest question, and it deserved something honest. "I want the people who ignored those warnings to answer for it," she said. "And then I want to go back to work." "In nursing?" "It's what I do." He was quiet for a moment. "When I went into Helmand in 2018, he said, we had a support medic that none of the team knew particularly well. Not a lot of field time, green, too careful with his words and briefings. The kind of careful that makes you think someone's not sure of what they know. First operation, we took contact and he froze for about 4 seconds. He paused. 4 seconds feels like a lot in contact. She knew. She didn't say so. He unfroze, Rourke said. And then he was the most competent medic I worked with in 3 years in theater. But nobody trusted him for about 6 weeks because of those 4 seconds. He looked at her. What I'm saying is, I've seen what happens when people make the wrong read at the beginning and then have trouble correcting it. You're saying Fitch made the wrong read. Ma, I'm saying Fitch made a read based on a thing he could see, military bearing, rule following, protocol watching, and called it a personality problem because it made him feel watched. He drained his coffee. He wasn't wrong that you were watching. He was wrong about what that meant. She appreciated the analysis. She didn't say so. What she said was, he had 3 weeks to fix those gaps. He did, Rourke said, and he didn't. Across the lot, she saw Harwick emerge from the building with 2 agents flanking her and a third carrying a box of what looked like documents. They moved to one of the federal vehicles with the kind of purpose that meant the formal investigation had moved from crisis response into evidence collection. Harwick made eye contact with Emily across the distance and gave a small, precise nod. Emily returned it. She looked at the building. Pine Valley Medical Center, its signage lit against the evening sky, its parking lot full of emergency vehicles, its trauma bay currently unmanned in a way that made something in her restless. There were patients in there who needed monitoring. The surgical teams were working, but the nursing floor was in chaos, and the emergency department was effectively offline, and there were people in rooms upstairs who hadn't been checked since the incident began. I need to ask you something, she said. Rourke raised an eyebrow. The building's been cleared. The patients need care. I'm standing in the parking lot. She looked at him. Is there anything that prevents me from going back in there and doing my job? He thought about it. Technically, you were separated from your position. By a man who is currently talking to a federal agent. Rourke looked at the building, looked at her. A corner of his mouth moved. I'm not the one to ask, he said. But I'll say this. I don't see a single active hospital administrator in that building right now, which means nobody with authority to prevent you is currently in a position to prevent you. She set down her paper cup. She went back inside. The 3rd floor was the worst. The oncology ward had been operating below staff capacity before the incident, and the 2 nurses who'd been on duty had both been through the shelter-in-place protocol. One of them, Ferreira, was in the staging area getting evaluated herself for what looked like a stress response that had tipped into something requiring medical attention. The other had been in the stairwell and was back on the floor but visibly shaken and moving through her tasks with the mechanical disconnection of someone whose brain was still running the emergency at low volume in the background. Emily asked her name. Rosario, she said, 26, 2 years in oncology. Rosario, Emily said. What's your most critical patient right now? Room 304. Mrs. Hartwell, she's on a continuous infusion and I need to check her line, but my hands are... She stopped, looked at her hands. They were steady, actually, but her face told a different story. I keep thinking I hear... You're okay, Emily said. Your hands are fine. Who's your next most critical after 304? Rosario walked her through it. 5 patients at various levels of monitoring need. Emily took 304 and 307 and sent Rosario to the others, and for the next 40 minutes they worked the floor in the coordinated overlap of 2 people who understood the shared language of critical care without needing to explain it. Mrs. Hartwell was 68, 3 weeks into a chemo protocol, and had been lying in her room through the entire incident, listening to sounds she couldn't identify, and nobody had come to tell her what was happening. She looked at Emily when she came through the door with a mixture of relief and contained anger. "Nobody told me anything," she said. "I'm sorry. There was an emergency in the building. Everyone's safe now." "That's not an explanation." "No," Emily agreed. "It's not." She checked the infusion line. "I'll explain everything I can while I check your line. Is that okay?" "That's better than nothing," Mrs. Hartwell said. So Emily explained not everything, not the details that would cause more worry than they resolved, but enough. An incident in the emergency department. Law enforcement responded. The building was cleared and secure. The staff was working to restore normal operations. Mrs. Hartwell listened. Then she said, "You look like you've been through a war." Emily looked down at her scrubs. There was blood on the sleeve, debrows from when she'd applied pressure, and her hair had mostly escaped the 4-second knot, and she could feel the specific exhaustion that lived not in the muscles but below them. "Bit of a day," she said. "Were you hurt?" "No." "You came back," Mrs. Hartwell said. "When I heard them bring my nurse out and tell everyone to leave, I thought, nobody's coming back. They're all going to leave us up here and run." She looked at Emily evenly. "You came back?" Emily finished the line check, wrote the notation on the chart. "Someone had to," she said. She was coming out of 307 when she heard it, down the hall, around the corner. 2 voices. One of them, Fitch, she recognized the rhythm of it, and one she didn't recognize but that had the cadence of someone who was choosing their words with legal precision. She moved toward it without deciding to. They were in the small family consultation room off the nurse's station. The door was open 8 inches. She didn't intend to stop. She was going to keep walking. But she heard her name. Not her name exactly. She heard Fitch say, "The nurse who re-entered the building is going to be a liability if she starts talking to media, because her characterization of events is..." The other voice said something low she couldn't catch. "Fitch, I understand that. What I'm saying is that the security memo doesn't tell the whole story, and if we can establish that the concerns raised were reviewed and addressed through appropriate channels..." She pushed the door open. Fitch stopped mid-sentence. He was sitting across from a man in a suit who had the compact alertness of a lawyer who'd been called in fast, which was probably exactly what he was. On the table between them was a legal pad and a folder. The folder had her name on the tab. She looked at the folder, looked at Fitch. "Appropriate channels," she said. "That's interesting." Fitch found his administrative voice. "Emily, you don't have authorization to be in this. I'm curious what the appropriate channel was for the email I sent 3 weeks ago," she said, "or the follow-up email 12 days ago, or the memo I put under your door, or the security meeting where you told me the concerns would be logged for Q4 review." The lawyer put his hand on the folder. "Ms. Carter," he said carefully, "I think it would be best if you..." "I also saved all of them," she said. "The emails, the sent receipts, the memo I put in the log before I slid it under the door, the meeting notes. I'm a very organized person. It's one of the things people find..." She looked at Fitch. "Irritating about me." Fitch's face had gone through several colors in the last 30 seconds. "You should talk to the federal investigators before you talk to anyone else," she said, "because they're going to find everything I kept. And I kept everything." She stepped back from the door. She kept walking down the hall toward room 307, where she had a patient to check on. Behind her, the consultation room went very quiet. Rourke found her on the 3rd floor at 6:47. She was at the nurse's station writing up the updated patient status when he appeared at the end of the hall, still in his vest, hands loose at his sides. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she was still learning how to read. "You're working," he said. The floor was short. He came to the station and stood on the other side of the counter, looked at the charts she was updating, looked at the ward around them, the quiet hum of monitoring equipment, the muted color of emergency power, the specific order she'd imposed on what had been a floor on the edge of slipping. "I need to tell you something," he said. She looked up. "The 2 individuals in custody, they're talking. It's early and we won't have the full picture for a while, but the preliminary is that this wasn't random." He paused. The hospital was targeted specifically, and the target within the hospital was not general, it was specific. She set down her pen. Who? We don't know the full answer yet, but the working theory is that someone inside this hospital had information about something that certain people wanted access to, not medicine, not equipment. Records, she said. He looked at her. That's a fast conclusion. There's an oncology patient on this floor, she said. His name is Oduya. He came in 3 weeks ago, and he came in under circumstances that… She stopped, went back through it in her head. The circumstances had felt slightly off the first time she'd encountered them, and she hadn't been able to articulate why exactly, but it had been the kind of off that lived below the level of clean articulation, the kind she'd learned to trust. Tell me, Rourke said. He was admitted as a standard oncology intake, but the paperwork had a secondary insurance routing that I've never seen on a standard intake. And his emergency contact is a number that, when I ran it in the system on a refill check about a week ago, it routed to a federal government exchange. Rourke was very still. I assumed it was a clerical error, she said. I flagged it to the floor coordinator and it got logged for Q4 review, Rourke said. Yes. He said something into his comm. She couldn't catch the words, but she caught the tone. Then he looked at her again, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked not quite in control of the thing his face was doing. Mr. Oduya, he said. What room? He's in staging right now, she said. He was well enough to transfer. The oncology nurse got him down before I arrived on the floor. I need you to show me exactly where. She was already moving. They went fast down the stairwell, and she was running the information back through her memory. The insurance routing, the number, the way Oduya had looked at her in the supply room with eyes that were tired and clear, the particular brand of calm he'd had in a crisis that didn't quite match the demographic of a 70-year-old cancer patient who'd been hiding behind a supply shelf for 40 minutes. I've had worse Tuesdays, he'd said. They hit the ground floor and went through the corridor toward the ambulance bay, and she scanned the staging area, the EMTs, the surgical prep, the patients in various states of waiting, and she found the right quadrant. The spot where Ferreira had left Mr. Oduya with a blanket and a wheelchair. The blanket was there. The wheelchair was there. Mr. Oduya was not. The blanket was still warm. Emily put her hand on it without thinking, the automatic clinical reflex of checking for residual heat. And it was there, which meant he hadn't been gone long. 5 minutes. Maybe less. Rourke was already on his comm, voice low and fast, calling the perimeter teams. She heard the words ambulatory patient, male, approximately 70, oncology floor. And then she stopped listening because she was looking at the space and thinking about the layout. The ambulance bay had 2 exits, the internal corridor she'd come through and the bay door itself, which was currently propped open because the EMTs had been moving equipment. Anyone mobile enough to walk could have slipped out through the bay door during the 45 seconds when everyone's attention was on the patient transfers. She stepped to the bay door and looked out. The evening had gone dark at the edges. The lot was still full of vehicles, federal, law enforcement, medical, and there were people everywhere, which meant cover, which meant someone moving quietly would have options. She scanned right first, nothing, then left. The east end of the lot was where the parking structure was, the same structure with 0 camera coverage on the east face, the same structure she'd drawn a red circle around on a building diagram. She moved. Rourke was 3 steps behind her before she'd made it out of the bay. Carter? East lot, the structure. I have a team. Your team is coming from the north entrance. If he went in from the ground floor east, they're going to push him up, not out. She was moving at a fast walk, close to a run, resisting the run because running in a crowd draws attention in the wrong direction. There's a vehicle ramp on the south face, ground to 3rd level. If someone is waiting to extract him, that's where they're coming from. The south ramp exits to a secondary street that doesn't have your perimeter coverage. He was already talking into the comm again. She kept moving. The east lot was lit at the entrance and dead dark at the far end where the structure began. She slowed at the transition point and let her eyes adjust, which took longer than she wanted because she'd been in artificially lit spaces for 4 hours and her night vision was compromised. She heard Rourke behind her and then beside her. South ramp, he said, low. 2 of my people are redirecting. How fast? 3 minutes. 3 minutes was a long time if someone was already loading. She moved into the structure. The ground floor smelled like concrete and exhaust, and the specific cold of enclosed spaces that get no direct sun. Her footsteps were quiet. Clinic shoes, rubber soles, the same shoes she'd worn for a 12-hour shift that had turned into something considerably longer. She moved along the east wall, staying in shadow, tracking the sound architecture of the space. She heard it at the southeast corner. Voices. 2 of them, maybe 3, and a sound she identified after 1 second as the controlled difficulty of someone moving a person who wasn't cooperating, not from resistance exactly, but from physical limitation. The sound of someone being helped to walk by someone who was trying to be faster than the helped person could manage. She stopped. Rourke stopped beside her. She held up 2 fingers, pointed southeast. He nodded. They moved. What she found at the southeast corner was not what she expected, and in her experience what you found was never exactly what you expected, but the gap between expectation and reality here was significant enough that she processed it in 2 separate beats. Mr. Oduya was on his feet, which was the expected part. He was being supported by a man she didn't recognize, late 30s, civilian clothes, the kind of build that came from a professional context she didn't need to name. And the 2 of them were moving toward the ramp. The unexpected part was that Oduya was holding something, a phone, and he was talking into it, quietly and steadily, in the measured cadence of someone dictating information they'd committed to memory. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. He stopped. The man supporting him went still. 3 seconds of nobody moving. "Mr. Oduya," she said. He looked at her. Those tired, clear eyes. "Ms. Carter," he said, "you left your blanket." Something moved in his expression that was close to a smile. "I did. I apologize for the trouble." Rourke was at her shoulder. The man supporting Oduya assessed him once, saw the vest, and made a decision Emily saw happen in real time. A visible relaxation, not surrender exactly, but the recognition that the situation was no longer one he could manage. Rourke spoke into his calm. "South ramp, ground level, I need 2. Then he looked at Oduya. "Sir, I need to ask you to stay with us." "I've been asking myself to stay for the better part of 3 months, Oduya said, with the particular dryness of a man who is referring to something medical and something else simultaneously. "Ms. Carter can tell you my commitment to that is inconsistent." "The call," Rourke said. "What are you transmitting?" Oduya looked at the phone in his hand. Then he looked at Rourke with an evaluation that lasted about 4 seconds and covered considerable ground. "Information," he said, "that needed to leave this building tonight regardless of everything else that happened in it. And that is all I will say without specific federal clearance present." He looked at Rourke. "Which I suspect you can arrange." "I can," Rourke said, "but it'll take a few minutes. I've waited 3 months. I can wait a few minutes more." They brought him back inside. Not to staging, to the family consultation room on the ground floor, which was small and had a door that locked, and which had the advantage of not being the room where Fitch's lawyer was currently managing a damage control operation. Emily checked Oduya's vitals while Rourke made calls. His blood pressure was higher than it should have been, his pulse slightly elevated, and he had the color of a man who'd just done more than his body was currently built for. "You need to rest," she said. "I'm aware," he said. "I'll rest when this is done." "What is this?" He looked at her. "You flagged my insurance routing 3 weeks ago. And you reported it." "Yes. To the floor coordinator, who did what with it?" She already knew the answer. "Filed it." "Filed it," he repeated. The dryness again. "In retrospect, I should have found a way to speak with you directly." He looked at his hands, spotted with age, thin, the hands of someone whose body was losing a long argument. "You were the only person in this building who noticed something was off and did something with it. Everyone else looked and looked away." "What is it I should have noticed?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. She could hear Rourke on the phone in the corridor, the controlled back and forth of someone navigating a chain of authorization quickly. "I'm going to tell you something," Oduya said. Not because I owe you an explanation, but because you came back in. Twice, I'm told. For people you didn't know, in a building you'd been asked to leave. He looked at her with the specific regard of someone who has spent a long time evaluating people and knows the difference between competence and character and has gotten used to finding them separate. That kind of behavior deserves some context. You don't have to... My name is not relevant, he said. What is relevant is that I worked in a federal oversight capacity, financial oversight. And I have spent the last 8 months building a case around a set of transactions that connect this hospital's administrative leadership to a procurement fraud operation involving federal medical supply contracts. He paused. The attackers tonight were not random. They were looking for records, specifically for the evidence I've been consolidating through my treatment access here. Emily sat with that for a moment. You've been using your oncology admission as cover, she said. Not cover, exactly. I genuinely have cancer. The dryness again, but this time edged with something else. It's been a useful arrangement. I had access to administrative areas. My presence was unremarkable, and the information I needed was here. He looked at the wall. The people who sent those men tonight knew I was here. They did not know until recently what I had already managed to transmit. The call you were making in the parking structure. A redundancy. The primary transmission went out 40 minutes ago, from this floor, using the hospital's own network. He paused. I used the nursing station terminal. Emily thought about the nursing station. About 40 minutes ago. Rosario had been in 304, and she'd been in 307, and the station had been unattended for about 8 minutes, she said. 7, he said. I timed it. The door opened. Rourke came back in with a look on his face that was several things at once. Clearance is confirmed, he said. He looked at Oduya. I know who you are. I assumed you'd figure it out. But the agency wants you transferred to a secure location within the hour. I need 30 minutes with your federal liaison first. I have a physical drive and I have documentation of the administrative transactions. The drive needs to go to the FBI team here tonight, directly, with a chain of custody witness. Rourke looked at Emily. She understood why without him explaining it. Me, she said. You're unaffiliated with the hospital administration, you've already given a formal statement, and you're the one who flagged the anomaly in the first place, Rourke said. Your name is already going to be in every document that comes out of tonight. If you're willing, being a chain of custody witness puts you in the record on the right side of this. She considered it for about 3 seconds. Yes, she said. The next 20 minutes moved the way certain stretches of time move in medicine and in operations, fast and dense, with no room between moments for anything that wasn't the next necessary thing. Agent Harwick came in at the 7-minute mark, and the conversation between her and Oduya was brief and precise, and Emily witnessed all of it without contributing, which was the correct role in this moment, and she knew it. She stood at the corner of the room near the door, and she watched Oduya, this man with his oncology pallor and his tired, clear eyes, hand a thumb drive to Harwick with the steadiness of someone who'd carried something heavy for a long time and had finally gotten to set it down. Harwick signed a form. Emily signed as witness. Rourke signed as the military liaison. Then Oduya sat back in his chair, and he did something she hadn't seen him do in any of the time since she'd first found him on the floor of that supply room. He let his face go. Not collapse. It wasn't dramatic. But the control he'd been maintaining, the precise management of expression that had read to her earlier as simply calm, released. What was under it was exhaustion, and something that was not quite relief. Not yet. But was the thing that came directly before relief when a person had been holding something so long they weren't sure yet how to stop. She looked away to give him the moment. Harwick was already on the phone, moving the chain of custody forward with the focused velocity of an agent who understood that what was on that drive had a clock on it. Rourke was coordinating the transfer logistics. Emily looked at the door, looked at the hospital beyond it. She thought about the oncology floor, about Rosario, who was up there alone now with 5 patients, about Mrs. Hartwell, who'd asked if she was hurt and hadn't gotten a real answer, about Trace Bowen in the surgical suite, 22 years old with a drain and a repaired bleed, who didn't know yet how close it had been. She thought about the wheelchair in the ambulance bay with the blanket on it. She thought about the panic button in Trauma 2 that didn't work. She thought about 3 weeks. Rourke found her in the hallway outside the consultation room at 8:12 in the evening. She was leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, not resting exactly, more the way you stand when your body is running out of what it was running on, and you've decided standing is better than sitting because sitting feels like stopping. "Transfer is arranged," he said. "He's being moved in 10 minutes. "Good. The drive is in federal custody. Harwick's team is already cross-referencing the transactions against the administrative records here. She thinks they'll have enough for arrest warrants by tomorrow morning." He paused. "Fitch is one of the names on the transaction records, apparently. Not peripheral, central." She absorbed that. "He was involved in the procurement fraud. Deep involved. The security gaps weren't negligence, Carter. They were deliberate. The specific vulnerabilities you flagged, the East Lot, the panic button, those were maintained. Deliberately maintained, to ensure access for tonight's operation." The full shape of it settled. "He wasn't just ignoring my warnings," she said. "He was the reason the warnings were necessary." Rourke's jaw was set in a way she recognized from the afternoon, the same way it had set when he'd heard Fitch's voice in the corridor. "Your security memo documented the exact vulnerabilities his people were counting on. When you filed it, you became a problem. So he removed me. 45 minutes before an operation he knew was coming." Rourke looked at her steadily. "You weren't removed for cause. You were removed because you'd seen exactly what they didn't want witnessed." She stood with that for a moment. She thought about the office, the badge on the desk. "You'll wish you listened." She'd meant it as a clinical assessment. She hadn't known how literally accurate it was. "He knew," she said. "He's going to have a lot of opportunities to discuss what he knew and when," Rourke said. Down the corridor, the consultation room door opened and 2 agents emerged with Oduya between them. He was moving slowly but upright, one hand on the wall for balance, the other at his side. He saw Emily as they passed. He stopped. The agent slowed. He held up a hand. "Miss Carter," he said. "Mr. Oduya." He looked at her for a moment. The tired eyes. The face that had gone and then come back, more settled now, like something had been reorganized. "The floor coordinator," he said. "When you reported the insurance anomaly, what did she say?" "That she'd flag it for administrative review." "And you let it go?" "I had 17 patients and a short-staffed shift." He nodded slowly. "If you hadn't flagged it at all, if you'd looked and looked away, this evening might have ended differently." He paused. "What I mean is, you noticed, even when the system didn't do anything with it, you still noticed." She didn't know what to say to that. "That's not nothing," he said. The agents moved him down the corridor. She watched him go. Then she heard it. Not from outside, not from the upper floors, from the direction of the emergency department, the part of the building that had been offline since the incident began, the part that was supposed to be locked down and cleared. A crash. And then another sound, one she recognized at a frequency below thought, one that her body responded to before her brain had caught up. A monitor alarm. The specific triple tone of a cardiac event. And then a voice, young, female, panicked, calling for help in a hallway where there was currently nobody to hear it. She was already running. She hit the ER bay doors at full speed and pushed through, and what she found on the other side stopped her for exactly 1 second. 1 second where she took in the whole picture and sorted it and moved. On the floor beside Bay 1, a woman, late 20s, scrubs, which meant staff. She'd collapsed. The overturned supply cart beside her told the story, and she was unresponsive, and the monitor she'd apparently been trying to restart had alarmed when she'd fallen against it. Standing 3 feet away, a nursing student, first or second year by her look, pressed against the wall with her hands up and her face white. The specific paralysis of someone whose training had not yet caught up to the reality in front of her. And on the monitor screen that had activated when the woman fell against it, a heart rhythm that was not compatible with consciousness and was not going to remain compatible with life. "What's her name?" Emily snapped, already on her knees. Petra. She's a tech. She was just... How long down?" I just found her." Emily had 2 fingers on the carotid. Nothing. She tilted the airway, checked breathing. Nothing. She locked her hands and started compressions. "You," she said, not looking up. "Call a code. The announcement system is on that wall panel. Press the red button, say code blue, ER Bay 1. Do it now." The student moved. Emily worked. 30 compressions, tilt, 2 breaths. Back to compressions. The rhythm that wasn't a rhythm yet. That was her creating the only circulation this woman had. That was her hands doing the work of a stopped heart. She heard the announcement overhead. The student's voice, shaking but audible, saying the right words. She heard running in the corridor. She didn't look up. She kept her hands locked and her weight driving down and her count running clean in her head. The same count she'd run in a lot of places on a lot of different people, some of whom had made it and some of whom hadn't. And the only thing that changed the outcome was the quality of the work in the seconds before help arrived. The door hit the wall. Rourke came through first. Not useful here. She knew that. He wasn't the person she needed. And behind him, one of the EMTs who'd been in staging, a man named Cruz she'd spoken to briefly, who was carrying a portable defibrillator by the handle, like he'd been moving toward something bad before he even knew what it was. "V-fib?" Cruz said, looking at the monitor. "V-fib," she confirmed. "No pulse on arrival. Bystander found her down." "Charging." He had the pads out, gel applied, hand on her shoulder. "Clear." She pulled back. The body on the floor jerked once. Everyone looked at the monitor. The line ran flat, then ran flat, then a beat. Irregular. Weak. But a beat. Another. Cruz exhaled through his nose. Sinus rhythm. Slow, but sinus. Emily sat back on her heels. Her hands were shaking. She noticed that without judgment, the way you notice information that is true and currently irrelevant. She looked up. The nursing student was in the doorway, still against the wall, tears running down her face in the silent way of someone who has been holding a breath for 90 seconds. Rourke was standing 3 feet away. He was looking at Emily with an expression she didn't immediately have a word for. Cruz was managing the airway. The rhythm on the monitor was stabilizing, still abnormal, still in need of a cardiologist and an ICU and about 6 more people, but present. A rhythm that had not been present 90 seconds ago. "She needs a cardiac consult now," Emily said to Cruz. "Who's your contact at Oregon Health?" "I've got a number." "Get them on the line while you prep transfer. She shouldn't move without a 12 lead, but we can't do a 12 lead without leads, so tell me what you've got in that bag." They went to work. It was 7 minutes before the cardiac team was reached and the transfer was being arranged, and Petra, whose last name Emily still didn't know, whose age she put at 27 or 28, whose story she knew nothing about beyond the fact that she'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time and had collapsed alone in an ER bay during the worst hour the building had ever had. Petra had a heartbeat and an airway and a blood pressure Emily didn't fully like, but was prepared to call survivable. She stood up. Her knees protested in a way that was going to be worse tomorrow. Her hands had stopped shaking. Her scrubs had blood on one sleeve and now had something else on the knees. She looked at the monitor. The rhythm held. Cruz looked at her over the patient. "You got here fast." "I heard the alarm." "From the hallway?" "I know what that alarm sounds like." He nodded once, the professional acknowledgement of one person who knows their business recognizing another. She looked at Rourke. He was still in the doorway. He'd moved slightly to one side when the EMT came through and he hadn't moved back. He was looking at her with that same expression, the one she hadn't had a word for 30 seconds ago and still didn't, but was beginning to understand. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't even admiration, exactly. It was recognition. The specific kind that comes not from meeting someone, but from understanding, finally, who you'd been looking at all along. "Carter," he said. She was already checking the supply cart for what Cruz was going to need in the next 10 minutes. "She needs a second IV access," she said. "Cruz, what's her left arm look like?" "Usable," he said. "I'll take it." She reached for the kit. Her hand closed on the tray, and then her phone buzzed. She almost didn't look. She was mid-task, and mid-task was not a time for phones. But it buzzed again, and then again. 3 in a row, which was the pattern she'd set years ago for the kind of contact that required immediate attention. She looked at the screen. The number was blocked. The message was 4 words. They know about you. She stared at the message for 2 seconds. Then she put the phone in her pocket and finished setting the IV line, because Petra needed the access and Petra's heart was still doing the fragile work of staying present, and that took priority over 4 words from a blocked number. Cruz checked the line. Good stick. Tape it down. She moves during transfer. I don't want it pulling. He taped it. She stepped back and pulled out her phone again and looked at the message, and then looked at Rourke, who was still in the doorway and who had seen her look at her phone and whose expression had shifted into something more alert. She walked to him and held out the screen. He read it. Read it again. When did this come in? 2 minutes ago. Blocked number. Does anyone have this number? My nursing colleagues? My landlord? Nobody else. She looked at him. Nobody from here. He took a photo of her screen with his own phone, then walked into the corridor and spoke into his comm for about 30 seconds. When he came back, his jaw had that set again. We need to move you, he said. I'm in the middle of... Cruz has it. I need you away from the ER bay. She looked at Cruz. He was managing Petra's airway, monitoring the rhythm, running the transfer prep with the focused competence of someone who did not need her standing over him. She'd done what she could do. The rest was cardiology. She went with Rourke. They moved to the administrative wing, which was empty and felt emptier than empty. The overhead lights were still on emergency power, and the offices on either side were dark, and the carpet muffled their footsteps in a way that made the space feel sealed off from everything happening in the rest of the building. Harwick met them at the junction of the main corridor. She'd seen the comm from Rourke, and she had the look of someone who'd been managing 3 things simultaneously and had just added a 4th. The number's untraceable, she said. Burner likely. But the timing tells us something. Someone who knew she was in the building, Rourke said. Someone who knew she mattered. Harwick looked at Emily. The message, they know about you, that phrasing, it's a warning, not a threat. There's a difference, Emily said. Yes. A threat says we're coming for you. A warning says get out of the way because something is already moving. Harwick paused. Which means whoever sent it is not on the side of whoever sent the men through the ER entrance. Emily thought about that. Someone inside the network who wants out. Or someone adjacent who's been watching this and decided tonight was the line. Harwick clicked her pen. We're working on it. In the meantime, I need to ask you something directly. Okay. Is there anything you know, anything you saw or heard or documented in your time at this hospital that you haven't yet told us? Emily thought about it carefully. She ran back through 11 months of shifts, of flagged issues, of meetings and memos and corridor observations, the insurance routing, the security gaps, the conversation she'd overheard in the consultation room. Then she thought about something else. The procurement fraud, she said. Fitch was on the transaction records. Yes. When I filed the security memo 3 weeks ago, he didn't just table it. He scheduled me for a performance review 4 days later. I didn't connect it at the time. The performance review felt like retaliation for the Kovacs situation. But the timing, he moved fast, Harwick said. Within a week of my memo, I was under review. Within 3 weeks, I was removed from duty. She looked at Harwick. The memo was specific about the East Lot, the specific vulnerabilities. If he was protecting those access points, he needed you gone before tonight. He needed me gone before tonight, Emily confirmed. Harwick was already writing. Dumb. What happened in the next hour happened in the way that consequential things sometimes happen. Not in a single dramatic moment, but in a series of incremental collapses, each one small enough that you might miss it if you weren't paying attention, but that added up to something irrevocable. The first was Fitch. Harwick's team brought him into the administrative wing conference room at 9:17. Emily was not in the room. She was in the corridor outside, which had a window that looked in through a narrow glass panel beside the door, and she did not stand there on purpose, but found herself there, and did not move away. Fitch was still in his sport coat. It was less rumpled now. He'd straightened it at some point, reasserted the surface, but his face had not recovered its usual composition. He sat across from 2 agents, one of whom was Harwick, and he had a lawyer beside him who Emily recognized as the man from the consultation room earlier, the one who'd had her file on the table. She couldn't hear the audio clearly through the glass, but she could read enough. She saw Harwick put a document on the table. She saw Fitch look at it and look away and then look at his lawyer. She saw his lawyer put a hand on his forearm, which was the gesture of legal counsel telling a client to stop doing what the client was about to do. She saw Fitch do it anyway. He talked. He started talking, and the body language of a man who had decided that the best way through a closing trap was to move fast. Changed everything in the room. The agents leaned in, Harwick stopped writing and just listened, and the lawyer put both hands flat on the table in the specific posture of someone who has realized their client has just made their job significantly harder. She watched for 40 seconds. Then she walked away, because watching wasn't helping anyone, and she had somewhere to be. She went to the ER bay, not to work, just to stand in it for a moment. The bay was quiet. Crews had moved Petra to the transfer vehicle 10 minutes ago, and the surgical teams were still in the OR suites upstairs, and the day shift's remnants were scattered across the building in various states of statement-giving and shell shock. The bay itself was the particular disorder of a space that had been emptied fast. The kind of mess that looked like abandonment but was actually evidence. Overturned cart, scattered gauze, the chair somebody had kicked over near the entrance, the mark on the floor where something had dragged. She stood in the center of it. 11 months she'd worked in this room. She knew where every piece of equipment was supposed to be. She knew which drawers stuck, which lights flickered, which of the monitors had a lag on the rhythm display that you had to account for if you were reading fast. She knew the sound the HVAC made when the temperature outside dropped below 40, and she knew that Bay 3 had a blood pressure cuff with a slow leak that you had to pump twice to compensate. She knew all of it, and none of it had been enough, and she'd been removed anyway. She thought about that. She thought about the memo under the door and the follow-up email and the 3 minutes she'd been given at the security meeting before Fitch had logged her concerns for Q4. She thought about standing in this room at 6 in the morning pulling expired IV bags while Kovacs told her she was running a pre-mission sweep. She thought about the badge on the desk. You'll wish you listened. She hadn't said it as satisfaction. She'd said it because she knew the way you know things after enough years in environments where being wrong about threat assessment meant people died. That the gaps she'd identified were real and the timeline on them was short. She hadn't known how short. She hadn't known that the gap she was looking at was deliberate. That changed things. Not the outcome. The outcome was what it was. Patients alive, drive in federal custody, men in handcuffs. But the meaning underneath it shifted. She hadn't just been ignored by a bureaucracy that was slow and self-protective and risk-averse, which was the version of events she'd been running in her head for 3 weeks. She'd been actively removed by a man who needed the vulnerabilities she'd identified to stay in place for something specific. She'd been right, and it had made her dangerous, and the response to dangerous was elimination. She stood in the bay and let that sit for a moment. Then she picked up the overturned chair, set it right, picked up the scattered gauze packages, stacked them on the supply cart, checked the cart's contents by reflex, the same sweep she'd been doing every morning for 11 months, moving through it in the systematic way that Kovacs had called a pre-mission sweep and that she called doing your job. She was halfway through the sweep when Daria appeared in the bay entrance. Daria, who'd been at the front desk at 6 in the morning when all of this started, who'd warned her about Kovacs' mood with the casual efficiency of someone who paid attention to everything and was paid attention to by almost no one. She was still in her scrubs. She looked like a person who had been through a significant amount of her own story while Emily had been going through hers. You're restocking, Daria said. Bay needs to be functional. The bay's offline. Harwick's team said, eventually it won't be offline. When it's not, it needs to be functional. Emily moved to the next section. What did you see today? Daria was quiet for a moment. I saw everything, she said. I'm always at the front desk. I see everything. She came into the bay and stood near the supply cart. I saw Fitch go into his office after the security meeting, and I saw him get on the phone. The door was closed, but I could see through the glass. She paused. He wasn't upset. After the meeting where you laid out all of those gaps and told them what could happen, he wasn't upset. He was calm. He was calm in the way someone is calm when something is going according to plan. Emily stopped moving. She looked at Daria. I didn't understand it at the time, Daria said. I thought maybe he was one of those people who process things slowly. But after today, she folded her arms. I've been trying to figure out what to do with that. Who to tell? Tell Harwick, Emily said. Tonight. She's in the admin wing. Will they care? I'm a nursing tech. I sit at the front desk. What I saw is what I saw through a glass panel. What you saw is what you saw through a glass panel 30 minutes after he was told the specific vulnerabilities that were about to be used in a coordinated attack on this building, Emily said. They'll care. Daria looked at her steadily. He was going to let it happen. He was helping it happen. The words settled between them. Daria nodded once. Admin wing. Ask for Harwick specifically. She went. The second collapse happened at 10:40. Emily was in the corridor outside the OR suite when Rourke found her. He was moving with purpose, and his face had the specific compression of someone who was managing new information and the response to it simultaneously. Glenn Dubrow is out of surgery, he said. How'd it go? Clean. He'll keep the shoulder. He paused. He's been talking. Pre-surgery, he gave a statement to one of Harwick's agents. He looked at her. He said he knew about the memo. Your security memo. She waited. Fitch showed it to him 3 days after you filed it, asked him to assess the gaps you'd identified, specifically to confirm which ones were most significant. Rourke let that land. Dubrow said he told Fitch the East Lot and the Trauma Bay panic button were the two highest priority items. He assumed Fitch was going to fix them. And instead Fitch flagged them for someone else. Dubrow didn't know that. He's saying he didn't know. His statement is consistent with someone who was used rather than complicit, but Rourke's jaw moved. He's the one who deprioritized the panic button repair. 3 times. He says he was following a directive from facilities that came through Fitch's office to defer non-critical maintenance items pending budget review. The directive was specific to the panic button? The directive was general, but when Dubrow flagged the button as needing priority override, the override request came back denied. He accepted the denial. He looked at her. He's the security manager. He should have pushed harder. Yes, she said. He knows that. I know he knows. She thought about him on the floor of the trauma bay, hand clamped to his shoulder, saying just like you said with the specific weight of a man, understanding in real time what his failures had cost. He's going to have to live with it. Fitch had a direct line to the group that organized the attack, Rourke said. We're confirming the connection now. The procurement fraud was the mechanism. Supply contract kickbacks running through 3 shell companies. The attack tonight was about recovering evidence before Oduya's case could be formalized. And Fitch was the inside contact. He gave them the building layout. He gave them the security gaps, and he gave them the timing. They went in 40 minutes after he removed you because he told them the window opened when you left. You were the only uncontrolled variable. She let that settle in its full weight. The only uncontrolled variable. She thought about what that meant in the context of 11 months. In the context of every memo, every flagged issue, every morning sweep, every 3-minute presentation in a security meeting. She'd been doing her job, and her job had registered, to the person with the most to lose from her doing it, as a threat. In a specific way, that was the most professional acknowledgement she'd received since she'd started at Pine Valley. What happens to him? She said. Fitch? Rourke's expression wasn't satisfaction. It was something more deliberate. Federal charges. The fraud alone is 15 years minimum. Conspiracy in the attack, that's a different category. The DA's office is in contact with the FBI. It'll move fast. The others. Kovacs. Kovacs is not on the transaction records. He's a witness, not a subject. He paused. He's also been in Harwick's interview room for the last 40 minutes voluntarily. Apparently he has a lot to say about the administrative structure and how information was managed above him. She nodded. The HR director is cooperating. The administrator who was in Fitch's office this afternoon, the one in the gray suit, he's the one who processed your removal paperwork. He's already given a statement and is requesting a deal. Everyone's talking. Everyone with something to trade is talking, Rourke said. That's how it goes. The ones who set it up hold longest. The ones who were used or adjacent move fast. She looked at the OR suite door. Through the small window, she could see the surgical team still working. Not Dubrow. A different suite. A different patient. Trace Bowen, she realized. Still in there. The MVA from this morning, she said. Still in surgery. Surgeon says it's going well. The movement didn't cause additional damage. He looked at her. You called it right. Moving him was the correct call. She didn't say anything to that. At 11:20, the third collapse. It was public. That was the part she hadn't expected. Not the fact of it, but the venue. Harwick's team brought Fitch through the main lobby to transfer him to federal holding. It was procedurally standard. The lobby happened to still contain approximately 30 hospital staff members who had been giving statements, being interviewed, or waiting for clearance to leave: nurses, techs, administrative staff, 2 physicians, including Kovacs, 3 of the surgical team who'd come down from the OR. Fitch came through in handcuffs. He walked with his spine straight and his chin level, the same way he'd walked when Rourke's operator guided him to staging hours earlier. The bearing of a man who had decided posture was the last thing he could control. The lobby went silent. Not the silence of shock exactly, the silence of people who were processing the confirmation of something they were in various stages of having suspected. Emily was at the far end of the lobby. She'd been there by accident. She'd come through looking for Rourke and had arrived at the wrong moment to leave without making it obvious. Fitch saw her. He stopped walking. One of the agents said something low, and he started walking again, but in the 2 seconds he stopped, he looked at her with an expression that was complicated enough that she couldn't fully read it. Not defiance. Not quite. Something more specific. The look of a man who has run a calculation all the way to its conclusion and understands now that he got the variable wrong. The variable was her. He walked past. The lobby stayed quiet for about 5 seconds after the door closed behind him. Then someone started crying. She couldn't see who. It was from the back of the group. And someone else said something that she couldn't catch. And the specific spell of the silence broke into the ordinary noise of people who had been through something long and terrible and were starting to come out the other side of it. Kovacs appeared beside her. She hadn't heard him cross the lobby. I didn't know, he said. Not a defense. The same statement he'd made before, but with more weight on it now that the full shape of what he hadn't known was visible. About the memo. About the gaps being deliberate. I know, she said. That doesn't make I know, Kovacs. He was quiet. The lobby noise continued around them. The performance review, he said. I signed it. Fitch brought it to me and I signed it without... I asked questions. He said there had been conduct concerns raised by multiple staff and He stopped. I should have asked who. I didn't ask who. She looked at him. I knew you were difficult, he said. In the sense of, I knew you pushed back. I knew you didn't defer the way some people defer. And I decided that was the same thing as a problem. He looked at the door Fitch had walked through. It wasn't. She didn't tell him it was fine. It wasn't fine. But she also understood the difference between a man who had been used and a man who had done the using, and they were not the same, and some part of her, the part that had been a medic and understood what field triage actually meant, knew how to make that distinction without needing to make it a resolution. The trauma bay needs to be restocked, she said. Emily, when the bay comes back online, it needs to be ready. She looked at him. That's a thing that needs doing, and I know where everything goes. He looked at her for a moment. Okay, he said. I'll help. They went. It was past midnight when Rourke found her in the supply room adjacent to the trauma bay, sitting on the floor with her back against the lower cabinet because at some point her legs had decided that standing was optional. She had a supply manifest on her knee, and she was cross-checking it against what she'd restocked, which was the kind of task that her brain could run on low fuel while the rest of her began to understand what it had been carrying for the last 18 hours. He sat down beside her on the floor. She noted that without comment. Field people had a different relationship with floors than most. Oduya secured, he said. Transfer went clean. Good. Harwick has the drive. The forensic accounting team is working overnight. She says the transaction trail is thorough. Oduya had 3 months to build the case, and he was careful. He paused. She says it's the cleanest evidence package she's seen for a case this complex. He's good at his job. He's very good at his job. Rourke looked at the supply manifest in her lap. Are you going to finish that? I'm going to finish it when my hands stop doing this. She held one out. The tremor was small but visible. Adrenaline dump. It takes a while. I know. They sat with the quiet. The message, she said. They know about you. Who sent it? We think we know. There's a junior analyst in the shell company structure. Someone low enough to not be a target, but high enough to see the whole picture. Forensics is checking the number against a device registered in Portland. He looked at her. Someone who watched the plan unfold and decided the nurse who kept filing memos deserved a heads up. Anonymous conscience, she said. Happens, especially when the plan starts going wrong. He paused. You weren't in danger. By the time that message came in, Fitch was already contained, but whoever sent it didn't know that. She thought about the 4 words on the screen, the blocked number, someone who had been watching all of it, the memo, the removal, the attack, and had chosen, in the moment of maximum consequence, to send a warning to the person they thought was most exposed. I want to know who it was, she said. You might? Eventually. He leaned his head back against the cabinet. Harwick's team will trace it. It'll be in the case file. She nodded. The supply room was the quietest place in the building right now. She could hear very faintly the sound of the overnight staff beginning to move back into the building as the federal teams completed their sweep and cleared sections for return. The ordinary machinery of a hospital resuming, cautiously, the work of being a hospital. She thought about Petra, transferred and in a cardiac ICU somewhere with a rhythm that was holding. She thought about Mrs. Hartwell on the 3rd floor, who told her she looked like she'd been through a war. She thought about the boy she'd carried through the corridor, 8 years old, arms around her neck, the specific weight of a child who trusts a stranger because the stranger is moving with purpose. She thought about Oduya saying you noticed. What happens now? She said. Rourke turned his head to look at her. To you specifically? To all of it. Fitch is charged tonight. The others follow over the next 48 hours. The shell company principals, the attack organizers. The hospital goes into federal oversight pending the investigation conclusion. He paused. Your name is in every document as the person who flagged the vulnerabilities, filed the reports, and maintained patient safety during the incident. That's a matter of record now. And me specifically. He looked at her. That depends on what you want. She looked at the manifest in her lap, at her hands, which had mostly stopped. She was about to answer when her phone buzzed again. Different pattern this time. One long vibration, a call. She looked at the screen. The number was not blocked. It was a number she recognized from an area code she hadn't seen in almost 3 years, from a time in her life that she'd thought was finished and filed and stored in the category of things that were past. The caller ID read, U.S. Army Human Resources Command, Fort Knox. She stared at it. Rourke was watching her face. Carter, he said carefully. Who is it? She looked at him, then she answered the phone. The voice on the phone was a woman's. Measured, professional, the kind of voice that delivered information without decoration. Ms. Carter, this is Colonel Renata Voss, Army Human Resources Command. I apologize for the hour. I understand you've had a significant evening. Emily stood up from the supply room floor. She wasn't sure why. Some reflex of formality that years of civilian life hadn't fully dismantled. Colonel, she said, I'll be direct. We've been in contact with Major Rourke's command and with the FBI incident liaison. We're aware of what happened at Pine Valley tonight, and we're aware of your role in it. A pause, brief, purposeful. We're also aware that your separation from the Army 2 years ago was processed under a general discharge characterization that we believe warrants review. Emily went still. I'm sorry? Your discharge, Ms. Carter. The characterization you received. Another pause. We have reason to believe the processing was influenced by a complaint that is currently under internal review for credibility. She heard papers moving. The short version is that you should have left with an honorable discharge. We'd like to correct that. Rourke was watching her from across the supply room. She couldn't read his face at this distance in this light, but she could see that he wasn't moving and wasn't pretending not to listen. When did this review start? Emily said. 3 weeks ago, independently of tonight. The colonel's voice didn't change, but something in the phrasing was deliberate. Tonight accelerated our timeline for reaching you. 3 weeks ago. The same window as the security memo. She didn't say that. She filed it. What do you need from me? A formal request for review, which we can process quickly given the circumstances, and your availability in the next 30 days for a meeting with the review board. Another pause. I should also tell you, this call is partly informational and partly because Major Rourke put your name in front of some people who wanted to understand who you were before they made a different kind of call. She looked at Rourke. He looked at the floor. What kind of call? She said. That one can wait for the morning, the colonel said. You've earned a few hours. A beat. What I will say tonight is that the Army doesn't often get the opportunity to acknowledge when it's failed someone. We'd like to use this one. She stood in the supply room in her stained scrubs with her hands that had stopped shaking, and she let the words settle through her, the way things settled when they were real and not just said. I'll submit the review request, she said. Good. My office will send the forms in the morning. The colonel paused one final time. Ms. Carter, what you did tonight, the Army sees it. We wanted you to know that. The call ended. She held the phone for a moment, then she put it in her pocket and looked at Rourke, who was now looking at her with the expression she'd finally found a word for her sometime in the last hour. The word was known. You called your command, she said. I filed an incident report, he said carefully. I described the events in full. I may have been specific about certain details. You went to bat for me. I told the truth about what I saw. He held her gaze. You spent 3 years keeping soldiers alive and left with the wrong piece of paper because someone with rank filed a complaint that nobody looked at closely enough. That's a bureaucratic failure. We have a process for correcting bureaucratic failures. And tonight accelerated it. Tonight gave people with authority a reason to move. He paused. The complaint against you. Do you know what it was? I filed a conduct report against a superior officer in my last rotation, she said. He didn't like it. He had more rank. He had more rank and you had better documentation, Rourke said. The review board is going to find the same thing Harwick found when she looked at your security memos. Someone who was right and got buried for it. She looked at the supply manifest still on the floor where she'd left it when she stood up. The mundane evidence of what she'd been doing at midnight after the longest day of the last 3 years, restocking a trauma bay in a hospital that had almost not survived the evening. The other call, she said. The colonel said you put my name in front of people for a different kind of call. Rourke crossed his arms. There's a training position. Combat Medic Instruction, Fort Bragg. The program is restructuring and they need someone with field experience and the position description says clinical translation capability, which means someone who can bridge the gap between battlefield medicine and civilian trauma care. He looked at her. It's a civilian contractor role. You wouldn't re-enlist, but you'd be training the next generation of combat medics. She absorbed that. They want me. They want someone with your specific combination. 3 deployments, trauma nursing, and the ability to maintain clinical function in a hot environment. He paused. Tonight added a line to that. The ability to maintain clinical function in a hot environment while running a 9-person evacuation through an active threat, and also, he stopped, and also being the kind of person who goes back in twice. She looked at the wall. She thought about what she wanted, which Rourke had asked her earlier in the evening and which she'd answered simply. The people who ignored the warnings to answer for it and then to go back to work. Half of that was done. More than half. I need to sleep before I make any decisions, she said. Yes, he said. You do, Mud. The morning came the way mornings come after bad nights. Not gently, not with any particular grace, just arriving because time continued regardless of what had happened in the hours before it. Emily slept 4 hours in the hospital's call room, which Rosario had unlocked for her with a key card and a look that communicated both you look terrible and please rest without either of those things being said. She woke at 5:47 to her phone alarm and lay there for 30 seconds, looking at the ceiling, letting the inventory of the previous day run through her. Taking stock. She showered in the call room's small bathroom, changed into fresh scrubs from a locker Rosario had also arranged, drank bad coffee from the break room machine. She felt like she'd been hit by something large. But she was upright, and that was the baseline. She went to the third floor first. Mrs. Hartwell was awake when she came through the door. The overnight staff had maintained the floor well. Rosario had stayed, Emily learned, for a double shift without being asked, running the ward through the night while the rest of the building sorted itself out. It was the kind of thing that happened without announcement and got noticed by almost nobody and mattered enormously. "You came back again," Mrs. Hartwell said. "I wanted to check your line before day shift." "You could have sent someone." "I could have." She checked the infusion. Running clean. She noted it in the chart. "How did you sleep?" "Surprisingly well. There's something about surviving a hostage situation that makes insomnia feel irrelevant." She watched Emily work. "Is it over?" "Yes." "The people who caused it?" "In federal custody. The investigation is ongoing, but the key players are contained." She capped the notation. "You're not going to hear gunshots in this building again." Mrs. Hartwell looked at her for a long moment. "What happens to you?" "I'm working on that." "Don't let them bury you again," she said. "Not sharp, direct. The way some women of a certain age and a certain experience learn to be direct. Not because they don't care about the feelings in the room, but because they've used up their tolerance for vagueness. I've watched what happens to people who are good at their jobs and not good at the politics of their jobs. They get managed down until they can't function, and then they get blamed for not functioning." She held Emily's gaze. "Don't let them do that to you again." "They didn't manage me down," Emily said. "They tried. I went into a burning building instead." Mrs. Hartwell almost smiled. "I know, I heard." She settled back. "Good." Eats it. The forensic accounting findings broke at 7 in the morning. Emily was in the hallway outside the administrative wing when Harwick's team began moving with the focused velocity that meant something had resolved. She caught Harwick between the mobile command unit and the main entrance, a woman who had been awake for longer than Emily and showed it only in the set of her shoulders. "The drive," Emily said. "Complete," Harwick said. 3 shell companies, 14 transactions, $8 million across a period of 2 years. She kept walking. Emily walked with her. Fitch's personal accounts show 11 deposits that correspond to transaction dates. The security chief had 4. There are 2 additional hospital administrators who are going to have very bad mornings today. The attack organizers. 2 individuals in federal custody, both cooperating, both of whom have identified the principal who contracted them. Harwick glanced at her. The principal is not a hospital employee. He's an investor. One of the procurement contractors whose supply contracts were generating the fraud revenue. He's been detained in Portland as of 40 minutes ago. The whole chain of it, all the way up and all the way out. Oduya's case, Emily said, goes to federal prosecution within the week. His 3 months of work in that oncology room built something solid. Harwick stopped walking and turned to face her. "I want to say something to you directly." "Okay." "The security memos you filed, both of them, are going to be central exhibits in the negligence and conspiracy charges against Fitch and the security chief. The timestamps matter. The specificity matters. The documentation of the follow-ups matters." She paused. "People in your position who see something real and report it and get buried, most of them, over time, stop writing things down, stop filing, stop keeping the sent receipts, because the system keeps telling them it doesn't matter." "I know," Emily said. "You didn't stop." "No." Harwick looked at her with something that wasn't quite warmth. It was more functional than that, the regard of one professional for another, but that carried weight. "That's why the case holds," she said. "Without your documentation, the security gaps could be characterized as general negligence. With it, we have a paper trail that shows deliberate suppression of specific warnings by people who had reason to want those gaps maintained. The difference between negligence and conspiracy is your sent folder." She walked away. Emily stood in the hallway. She thought about the evening 2 weeks ago when she'd almost deleted the follow-up email. She'd been tired. A 12-hour shift, nobody had responded to the first memo. The security meeting hadn't happened yet, and the small voice of demoralization that lives in anyone who has filed enough reports into silence had said, "What's the point?" She'd had the cursor on the discard button for about 4 seconds. She'd sent it anyway. Some decisions were that small, and the distance between those 4 seconds and everything that had happened last night was not measurable in any unit she had language for. The public accounting happened the way Rourke had said, not in a single moment, but in a sequence, each one adding to the weight of the previous. At 9:15, the hospital board convened an emergency session and voted to place Pine Valley Medical Center under temporary federal oversight pending the completion of the investigation. The vote was unanimous because the 3 board members who might have complicated it were currently unavailable, being in various stages of federal interview or legal consultation. At 10, the Oregon Health Authority issued a public statement confirming the incident, the investigation, and the suspension of the hospital's administrative leadership pending review. Fitch's name was in the statement, so was the security chief's. The statement was careful and legal and said alleged in all the right places, but anyone who read it understood the direction of travel. At 10:40, a journalist who'd been parked outside since 8 got the name of a federal source who confirmed, off record, that the attack on Pine Valley had been organized by people with financial interests connected to the hospital's administrative structure. By noon, the story was regional. By 3 in the afternoon, it had gone national, with the particular velocity that certain stories get when they combine institutional corruption with a hospital setting and a resolution that involved federal agents and military personnel and a nurse who'd been fired 45 minutes before the attack. Emily didn't watch the coverage. She was working. The hospital was operating at partial capacity under the emergency oversight structure, and the nursing floor needed people, and she was there. And she had her competency certifications and her clinical record, and nobody currently in a position of authority who had any interest in removing her. Rourke had spoken to the oversight coordinator. She'd been cleared to work on a temporary basis pending the formal investigation outcome. She worked the trauma bay through the afternoon with a travel nurse named Deshawn who'd been brought in by the oversight team and who moved with the brisk economy of someone who'd worked 30 different hospitals in 15 years and had stopped being surprised by anything. "You're the one," he said, mid-shift. "Probably," she said. "National news already." "I know." "How's that feel?" She thought about it. "Weird," she said. "I filed memos. I moved patients through a corridor. The army showed up." "You went back in," he said. "That's what people are saying. You went back in twice." "The patients needed care." He looked at her in the way people looked at her when she said that. The slight adjustment of assessment, deciding whether the simplicity was genuine or performed. She'd learned that people had trouble with genuine. They kept expecting the performance. "Yeah," he said, "but most people don't." She didn't have an answer for that, so she went back to work. 6 days after the incident, Emily Carter sat in front of the Army Review Board. It was a small room at a federal building in Portland. Not dramatic, not ceremonial. 3 people at a table, documents in front of each of them, the specific neutral efficiency of a process that had been done many times before and would be done many times after. She answered their questions directly. The original complaint against her, the conduct report she'd filed against the superior officer, and the counter-complaint that had downgraded her discharge characterization had been reviewed. The officer in question had since left the Army under circumstances the board described as separately investigated. The counter-complaint had been found to contain material inconsistencies that the original review board had not caught or had not chosen to catch. The review took 40 minutes. The board chair, a colonel named Marcus Fell, who had the careful face of someone who'd spent 20 years making consequential decisions and had made some of them wrong and knew it, read the outcome into the record. General discharge upgraded to honorable. Military service record amended to reflect the combat medic commendation from the Hellman rotation, which had also been suppressed in the original processing. Emily sat in that room and listened to her own record being corrected and felt something move through her that she didn't immediately have a name for. It wasn't triumph. It was more structural than that. Like a thing that had been leaning wrong for a long time had been straightened, and the straightening didn't make the years of the lean disappear. but it changed the angle of everything going forward. She thanked the board. She meant it. In the hallway outside, Rourke was waiting. "Done?" he said. "Done." He handed her a folder. "The position description," he said. "Well, Fort Bragg. Read it when you're ready. No pressure on timeline." She took it. She didn't open it immediately. She held it, and they walked out of the federal building into the gray Portland morning, and she thought about what it meant to have a record that was finally true. What it meant to have documentation that reflected what had actually happened, in the correct order, with the correct characterization. She thought about Harwick saying the difference between negligence and conspiracy is your scent folder. She thought about Mrs. Hartwell saying, "Don't let them bury you again." She thought about 8 years old and arms around her neck in a dark corridor, and Trace Bowen at 22 with a repaired bleed and a drain and a whole remaining life ahead of him, and Petra whose heart had stopped and started in an empty ER bay at the worst hour of the night. She thought about what it meant to be the person who went back in. The formal recognition came 3 weeks later. Not a ceremony exactly. Pine Valley was still under oversight and in no position to host anything that looked like celebration. But the Oregon Nurses Association and the Oregon Army National Guard coordinated a small acknowledgement event at a conference space in downtown Redstone, and it was attended by hospital staff, 2 members of Rourke's team, Agent Harwick, and about 40 other people who had various reasons to be in that room. Daria was there. So was Rosario, who had not gone home the night of the incident until 6 the following morning, and had then returned for her regular shift 8 hours after that, because that was the kind of person Rosario was, and that was the kind of thing that never made the national news. Deshawn, the travel nurse, had extended his contract at Pine Valley by 2 weeks and was in the back row. Kovacs was there. He sat in the second row and did not try to talk to Emily before the event, which was the right call. And when they made eye contact briefly across the room, he gave her a nod that had nothing in it except acknowledgement, which was also the right call. The ONA representative spoke about the security memo and the documentation trail and the specific professional courage of a nurse who had persisted in filing concerns through a system that was actively working against her. She used the word integrity several times and meant it in the technical sense, the structural sense, the sense of a thing that holds its shape under pressure. Rourke spoke briefly. He talked about Helmand and about a support medic rotation that had been exceptional in ways that the record had not reflected, and he said that the Army's failure to correct that for 2 years was a failure it was glad to have finally fixed. He said it plainly, without the hedging language that institutions usually used when they admitted error, and the plainness of it landed harder than ceremony would have. When Emily was invited to speak, she stood at the front of the room and looked at the people in it and felt the particular discomfort of being seen that she'd carried her entire adult life, and that she suspected she would carry forever, because some discomforts were not problems to be solved, but conditions to be lived with. She hadn't prepared remarks. She'd thought about preparing remarks, and then decided that prepared remarks were for situations she understood in advance, and this situation she hadn't. "I filed a memo," she said, "and then I filed a follow-up, and then I sat in a meeting for 3 minutes before they moved on to the next agenda item, and then I got fired." She looked at the room. None of that was heroic. It was just doing the job, watching the building, writing down what I saw. She paused. "The thing I keep coming back to is the patient in room 304, Mrs. Hartwell. She's still in treatment, she's doing okay, and the night everything happened, she said something to me that I've been thinking about since." She looked at her hands, which were still today, completely still. She said, "Don't let them bury you again." And I've been thinking about what that means for someone like me, someone who is trained to keep going regardless, to push through, to document and report and file and push again, even when everything in the system is telling you that the system doesn't care what you have to say. The room was quiet. "The system cared," she said. "Eventually. Not because I got louder or more persistent or more anything, but because I kept the receipts, because I wrote down the date and the time and the specific vulnerability and the specific risk and sent it from an account with a timestamp. And when the investigation needed evidence, the evidence was there." She looked up. "That's not a dramatic lesson. It's just do the work, document the work. Don't let anyone convince you that the work doesn't matter because it isn't being acknowledged." She thought about the 4 seconds with the cursor on the discard button. Sometimes you're the only one in the room who sees the thing clearly, she said. That's not arrogance. That's not insubordination. That's training. And training matters most when nobody wants to hear what it's telling you. She stopped there. The room held the quiet for another moment. Then someone started clapping, and it spread. And she stood at the front of it and felt the specific quality of being recognized by people who understood what had actually happened. Not the version with the Army helicopter and the cleared building and the federal arrests, but the version with the memos and the follow-ups and the meeting where they gave her 3 minutes and moved on. Both versions were true. The second one was the one that mattered. Quotes. 2 months after the incident, Emily Carter drove east out of Redstone on I-84 with everything she owned in the back of a truck she'd rented for $240 and would return in North Carolina. Pine Valley had offered her position back. The new interim director, a physician named Dr. Laura Mbeki, who'd come in from the Oversight Committee and who ran a department meeting the way Emily ran a supply check, systematically and without patience for what didn't serve the patient, had made the offer personally and had included a title that was 3 steps above where Emily had been before. She'd said she'd think about it. She'd thought about it. She'd opened the folder from Rourke and read the position description at Fort Bragg and thought about that instead. About 22-year-olds who were going to be dropped into situations where the difference between a patient who made it and one who didn't was the quality of the hands on the ground. About what she knew how to do. About the specific combination of a field deployment and a trauma bay and 11 months of fighting a bureaucracy to fix a panic button that the next person down the road might not have to fight as hard. She'd sent the acceptance to Fort Bragg and her resignation to Pine Valley on the same morning. Dr. Mbeki had called her. "I'm not going to argue," she'd said, "because it sounds like the right thing for you. But I want you to know, the protocols you wrote during the federal oversight period are being formally adopted. Every gap you documented is now a fixed procedure. Your name is going to be on the policy header. You don't have to do that. I'm not doing it for sentiment. I'm doing it because the policy is better if people know where it came from." A pause. "The nurses on your floor know what you did. Not the news version, the real version. The supply restocks at midnight and the floor you held together while federal agents were in the conference room." Another pause. "That matters too." It did. Emily knew it did. She drove east and the Oregon landscape changed around her. The coast range giving way to the high desert, the sky opening up in the way it did on the east side of the mountains, wider and less soft. She had the window down and the air was cold and smelled like sage and dust and the specific nothing of open ground. She thought about what it had cost. 2 years with the wrong piece of paper. 11 months in a system that buried her reports and removed her from the room where she was most necessary. The 45 minutes in the parking lot that had turned into the longest night she'd had since Helmand. She thought about whether it had been worth it, and the honest answer was that worth it was the wrong frame. It wasn't something she'd chosen. She'd simply done the work that was in front of her, the way she'd always done the work that was in front of her, and the work had mattered whether anyone acknowledged it or not. The acknowledgement was real, and she received it, and it meant something. But the work had mattered before the acknowledgement. That was the thing. That had always been the thing. The people who bury the ones who see clearly do it because clarity is threatening, because someone who documents the gaps and files the memos and keeps the sent receipts and refuses to look away is a standing indictment of everyone who chose to look away. The easiest solution is removal. The most common solution is removal. And removal works, most of the time, because most people who get removed are exhausted enough by the time it happens that they accept it as the end of the sentence. She hadn't accepted it as the end of the sentence. She'd walked back through the ambulance bay. She'd gone back in twice. Not because of what she expected to get from it, because there were people in there who needed care, and she was the person who knew how to give it, and the revocation of a badge in an administrator's office didn't change the first part of that sentence. It had never changed the first part. The road ran east and the truck ran steady, and Fort Bragg was 1,700 miles away, and somewhere in that distance there were rooms full of 22-year-olds who were going to learn what she knew about the space between a heartbeat that stops and one that starts again. She turned up the radio. She drove.